You drive past it without slowing down anymore. The oak tree stands where it always stood, at the bend in the road where the pavement crumbles into gravel, where the suburban grid loosens its grip and something older pushes through. You've passed it 1,000 times, 10,000 times, and for years now it has been invisible to you in the way that only the most familiar things can be invisible. Not unseen exactly, but unnoticed. A fixture, a given. Background noise in the visual static of your commute, your errands, your constant movement from one obligation to the next. But today, something catches. A flicker of recognition that has nothing to do with sight. You glance at it as you pass, and for just a moment the present thins, and you remember what that tree used to mean. Not the tree itself, perhaps, but what it marked. The boundary, the edge of the known world. The place where your childhood geography ended and the unmapped territory began. You don't stop. You have somewhere to be, something pulling you forward, the same low-grade urgency that fills every hour of every day. But the image stays with you as you drive on. The massive trunk, the sprawling canopy, the way its roots have buckled the asphalt at its base, as if the earth itself is trying to reclaim what was briefly paved over. And you feel something you can't quite name. Not sadness, not exactly. A kind of hollowness, a sense that you've lost something you didn't know you were supposed to keep. This is the strange ache of modern life. Not the sharp pain of loss, but the dull throb of disconnection. You move through a world of plenty, of convenience, of constant stimulation and infinite choice. And yet, something feels absent. Something essential. You can't point to what's missing because it isn't a thing exactly. It's more like a relationship, a sense of place, a feeling that you belong to something larger than yourself, something that was here before you and will remain after you're gone. The old oak doesn't care whether you notice it or not. It doesn't require your attention to justify its existence. It simply is, rooted in the same soil it has drawn from for longer than anyone can remember, indifferent to the traffic that rushes past, the seasons that strip and restore its leaves, the human dramas that play out in its shadow. And maybe that's what catches you, that permanence, that rootedness. The fact that while everything in your life seems fluid and temporary and subject to constant revision, is this one thing has remained fundamentally unchanged. You live in a world designed for motion. Your phone buzzes with notifications from people in different cities, different time zones, different continents. You can be anywhere virtually, connected to everyone digitally, your attention scattered across a dozen platforms and 100 conversations that never quite resolve. Your job might not exist in 5 years. Your neighborhood is changing so fast, you barely recognize it. The stores you shopped in as a child are gone, replaced by something else, which will itself be replaced. Even your memories are stored in clouds, scattered across servers in locations you'll never see, backed up and synced and accessible from anywhere, which somehow makes them feel like they exist nowhere. And in the midst of all this flow, all this change, all this relentless forward motion, you pass an oak tree that has stood in the same spot for longer than your grandparents were alive, longer than the road existed, longer than the idea of this place as a suburb or a town or anything other than forest and field. And for just a moment, without meaning to, you remember what it felt like to be a creature with a territory, a being with a place. The psychologists and sociologists have names for what you're feeling. Placelessness, rootlessness, the anxiety of liquid modernity. But naming it doesn't dissolve it. If anything, the names just confirm what you already suspect, that you are not alone in this feeling, that it's a condition of the age, a side effect of progress, the price paid for mobility and freedom, and the ability to reinvent yourself whenever the mood strikes. But tonight, driving home in the failing light, passing the oak tree one more time as the sun sets behind it and the branches become a black lacework against the orange sky, you wonder if maybe the problem isn't psychological at all. Maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe you're just an animal that evolved to live in a particular way, in a particular kind of relationship with particular places. And maybe no amount of technology or convenience or connectivity can substitute for the thing that was lost when you stopped belonging to the ground beneath your feet. The tree stands at the edge of what used to be your boundary. When you were young, before you could drive, before you could range freely across the landscape in climate-controlled vehicles, that oak marked the limit of your explorations. Beyond it lay territory you rarely entered. Unknown streets, other neighborhoods, the houses of strangers. To go past the oak was to leave the familiar and enter the foreign, and you did it with the kind of awareness that children have when they're testing the edges of their autonomy. Nervous, excited, slightly afraid, you knew every crack in the sidewalk between your house and that tree. Every lawn, every driveway, every dog that might bark from behind a fence. You knew which houses had the best climbing trees, which yards to avoid, where the shortcut through the woods emerged. You knew the landscape the way a wolf knows its territory or a bird knows its nesting ground. Not from maps or GPS coordinates, but from direct, repeated, embodied experience. From moving through it with your own legs, your own eyes, your own hands, touching bark and stone and chain link fence. And the oak was the punctuation mark. The end of the sentence. The place where your world concluded and someone else's began. It wasn't a dramatic boundary. No fence, no sign, no official demarcation. Just a tree. But you felt it. Everyone felt it. The kids in your neighborhood used it as a landmark, a meeting point, a rallying spot. You'd gather there before ranging outward together, or you'd retreat to it when some game or adventure had run its course. It was, without anyone ever saying so explicitly, a kind of anchor point, a way of orienting yourself in space. You didn't think about any of this at the time, of course. It was just the way things were. The tree was there and you were here. And the relationship between the two was part of the unexamined fabric of daily life. But now, decades later, living in a different kind of world, you find yourself thinking about it more than makes sense. Why should one tree matter? Why should it stick in your mind like a splinter you can't quite extract? Maybe because it represents something you didn't know you needed until it was gone. Not the tree itself, but what it stood for. The idea that the world could be known, that you could have a relationship with a place deep enough that its features became part of your internal map, your sense of self, that you could belong somewhere not because you chose it from a list of options or because it met your criteria for quality of life, but simply because you were there, you were of it, you had grown into it, like roots growing into soil. Your apartment now, wherever it is, however nice it might be, is fundamentally different. It's a space you occupy, not a place you belong to. You chose it from among many options. You pay for the privilege of living there. You could leave next month if you wanted, if the rent increased or a better opportunity arose elsewhere. There's nothing rooting you to it except inertia and convenience. And while this freedom is real and valuable, while being able to move and choose and optimize your living situation is undeniably a form of privilege, it comes with a cost you're only beginning to understand. The cost is the loss of the deep knowledge that comes from staying, from being in one place long enough that you know its rhythms and patterns and secrets, from watching the same trees bud and leaf and bear themselves year after year until you can feel the turning of the seasons in your bones, from knowing your neighbors not as friendly strangers, but as part of the fabric of daily life, in people you've seen age and change and struggle and thrive, from having landmarks that mean something not because they're historically significant or architecturally notable, but because they were there when something important happened to you. The oak tree witnessed your childhood. That's a strange thing to say, maybe, to attribute witness to a tree. But it's true in the way that truth sometimes works poetically rather than literally. The tree was there. It marked the days and years. It stood unchanged while you changed beneath it, growing from small to large, from dependent to independent, From someone who needed permission to cross the street to someone who could navigate the neighborhood alone. It held steady while everything else in your life shifted and evolved. And maybe that's what draws you back to thinking about it now. Not nostalgia for childhood itself. You're old enough to know that childhood had its own difficulties, its own confusions and fears and limitations. But longing for what the tree represents, permanence in a world of flux, rootedness in a culture of mobility. A witness to your becoming that asks nothing of you and judges nothing, that simply remains solid and indifferent and alive. You live now in a state of constant readiness to move. Even if you've been in the same city for years, there's a quality to your habitation that's fundamentally provisional. You don't put down roots, you put down stakes, temporary and easily pulled. Your furniture is chosen for its resale value. Your lease is renewable but not permanent. Your job is a stepping stone to the next job. Your relationships, even the good ones, exist in a context where everyone understands that people come and go, that distance is manageable, that you can always stay in touch even if you're no longer in the same place. This is freedom, you tell yourself. This is the modern condition. This is what it means to be alive in an age of opportunity and mobility and choice. And it is. All of that is true. But it's also true that something in you aches for the rootedness you've left behind. For the feeling of belonging to a place so thoroughly that leaving it would feel like tearing yourself out of the ground. The oak doesn't move, can't move. Its survival depends on staying exactly where it is, on deepening its relationship with that particular piece of soil, those particular nutrients, that particular angle of sunlight. What looks like limitation from the outside is actually a form of profound intimacy. The tree knows that place in a way that's impossible for anything mobile. It has grown into it, adapted to it, shaped itself around its conditions, and been shaped in return. You, meanwhile, have optimized for mobility. You can work from anywhere. Your social life exists largely on screens. Your entertainment is streamed, your food is delivered, your shopping is done online. You have liberated yourself from the tyranny of place, and the liberation is real. But so is the cost. Because in freeing yourself from dependence on any particular location, you've also freed yourself from the gifts that come from deep relationship with place. The knowledge, the belonging, the sense of being part of something that extends beyond your individual life. This is what unsettles you when you pass the oak tree. Not memory exactly, though memory is part of it, but recognition. The recognition that you were once rooted, that you once belonged to a place in a way you no longer belong to anywhere. And the recognition that this loss, which you've barely acknowledged, which you've rationalized as progress and freedom, might actually be one of the central absences in your life. The restlessness you feel isn't just personal psychology. It's not just your individual quirk or failing. It's structural. It's built into the way modern life is organized. You're supposed to be restless. You're supposed to be ambitious, mobile, flexible, always ready to relocate for a better opportunity. You're supposed to treat place as instrumental, as a means to an end, and as something to be optimized rather than something to belong to. The idea that you might want to stay in one place for decades, to sink roots so deep that moving becomes unthinkable, is treated as quaint at best and limiting at worst. But the oak tree doesn't care about optimization. It doesn't care about opportunity cost or career advancement or maximizing its potential. It simply grows year after year in the same spot, doing the same thing, being the same kind of creature it has always been. And there's something in you that recognizes this as valuable, as important, as a kind of wisdom that modernity has forgotten. You scroll through social media and everyone is everywhere. Your feeds are filled with people in different cities, different countries, was beautiful locations and exotic experiences, and the constant implicit message that staying still is a kind of death. That to be alive is to be in motion, to be seeking, to be optimizing. You feel the pressure of it, the sense that if you're not constantly upgrading your life, constantly pursuing the next thing, you're somehow failing, falling behind, wasting your potential. And yet, there's the oak tree, still there, still growing, still doing what oak trees do, not anxious about missing out, not worried about whether it's reached its potential, not comparing itself to other trees in other locations, just being, just existing in relationship with the place it has always been. What if the restlessness isn't a sign that you need to keep moving? What if it's a sign that you've moved too much already? What if the ache you feel isn't the pain of limitation, but the pain of disconnection, of having cut yourself off from the kinds of relationships that humans evolved to need? Your ancestors didn't move the way you move. They might have migrated with the seasons, followed game, relocated to better land. But even in their movement, there was a relationship with place that's difficult for you to imagine now. They knew the landscape with an intimacy born of necessity. They could read weather in the behavior of birds, predict water from the presence of certain plants, navigate by stars and landmarks and the feel of the wind. They belonged to their territory not because they were trapped there, but because their survival depended on knowing it deeply. And there were always the markers, the ancient trees, the distinctive rocks, the places where important things happened. Birth trees and treaty trees and hanging trees and dancing trees. Every culture has them, these living landmarks that anchor memory and meaning to specific locations. They served practical purposes, meeting points, boundary markers, navigation aids. But they also served something deeper. They were witnesses. They were continuity. They were proof that some things endure even as human lives come and go. The oak at the edge of your childhood neighborhood is just one tree. It has no historical significance. No plaques commemorate it. No tourists visit it. But it has been a landmark for every child who grew up in that area, a marker and a witness. The edge of the known world for dozens of small explorers who ranged outward from their homes and used it as a point of return. How many others have felt what you feel? How many other people, now scattered across the country or the world, pursuing careers and opportunities and the restless dream of optimization, carry in their minds the image of that same tree? How many of them pass it occasionally, if they still live in the area, and feel the same strange pang of recognition and loss? You're all out here now, unrooted, mobile, free to go anywhere, and therefore never quite anywhere, belonging to no place deeply enough that it shapes who you are. And perhaps in all your individual journeys, in all your personal quests for meaning and purpose and success, you're collectively enacting a kind of forgetting, a loss of the knowledge that comes from staying, from belonging, from being rooted. The oak tree knows something you've forgotten. It knows that depth is more valuable than breadth. That intimacy with one place yields more wisdom than superficial contact with many places. That there is a kind of knowledge that only comes from staying, from weathering seasons, from growing into the particular conditions of a particular location and being shaped by them even as you shape them in return. But you can't become an oak tree, you're human, and humans move. This is part of what you are, part of how you've survived and adapted and spread across the planet. The question isn't whether to move or stay. That's too simple, too binary. The question is, what's lost when movement becomes the default, when rootedness is treated as a failure of ambition, when belonging to a place is seen as a limitation rather than a gift? And maybe the deeper question, and the one that surfaces when you pass that oak in the fading light and feel the strange ache of recognition, is whether it's possible to find rootedness again. Not by returning to the past. You can't go back, and even if you could, the past had its own hardships and limitations. But by finding a way to belong to where you are now, to sink roots even in temporary soil, to know a place deeply even if you might leave it someday, to let yourself be shaped by landscape and weather and the particular character of this specific location, rather than holding yourself in a state of permanent readiness to relocate. The tree stands in the gathering darkness. The traffic continues to flow past it, headlights illuminating and then leaving behind its massive trunk, its reaching branches. People drive by without seeing it, their minds already wherever they're going, their attention claimed by phones and conversations and the endless interior monologue of worry and planning and regret. But it's there. It has always been there, at least for as long as there have been houses and roads and children who needed an edge to their world. And it will likely be there long after you're gone, long after everyone who remembers what it meant to use it as a landmark has disappeared. It will stand and grow and leaf and bear itself through seasons and years, indifferent to human meaning but nonetheless carrying it, a living marker of something that matters even if you can't quite say what. And perhaps that's enough. Perhaps it doesn't need to mean anything more than it already does. Perhaps the ache you feel when you see it isn't a problem to be solved, but a recognition to be honored. A reminder that you are an animal that evolved to belong to places, that some part of you still longs for the rootedness you've traded for freedom, that the mobility and choice and opportunity of modern life, real as they are, come at a cost that's deeper than you usually acknowledge. You drive on into the night, toward whatever destination currently claims you. But the image of the tree stays, a dark shape against a darkening sky, rooted and permanent and still. And maybe tonight, instead of scrolling through feeds or planning tomorrow or losing yourself in the usual distractions, you let yourself feel what that image evokes. The longing for place, the ache of rootlessness, the possibility that belonging might matter more than you've allowed yourself to admit. The world won't stop moving. The pressures toward mobility won't relent. But the oak tree offers a different kind of possibility. Not an answer exactly. Not a solution to the problem of modern rootlessness. Just a reminder that some things stay. That depth exists. That it's possible to grow in one place, to belong to one patch of earth, to let the years and seasons work their slow magic of transformation and growth. And maybe, in remembering that, you remember something about yourself. Something that got lost in the rush toward optimization and opportunity. Something that still aches to belong, not to the world in general, not to the digital commons, not to the abstraction of humanity, but to this place, this soil, this particular configuration of light and weather and stone. To have roots again, even if you know you might someday need to pull them up and move on. The oak doesn't judge your restlessness. It simply stands, offering the silent testament of its presence. Here, now, rooted, alive, a witness to the possibility that staying might be its own kind of wisdom and that belonging to place might be worth more than all the freedom in the world. But where does it come from, this sense that the tree knows something? You're not naive enough to think trees have thoughts or intentions or wisdom in any way a human would recognize. The oak doesn't know anything. It responds to light and water and nutrients, grows according to genetic programming and environmental conditions, or exists in a state that's alive but not conscious in the way you understand consciousness. And yet the feeling persists. Not that the tree knows exactly, but that it represents something you need to know. That its rootedness is a kind of answer to a question you've been asking without realizing it. The question isn't about trees. It's about you, about what it means to be human in a time when all the old certainties about place and belonging have dissolved into air. Your great-great-grandparents likely lived within a day's walk of where they were born. They knew the names of the families in their area going back generations. They knew which wells had the sweetest water, which fields flooded in spring, where the deer paths ran through the forest. They knew these things not from study, but from life, and from the accumulated experience of existing in one place long enough that its features became internalized, part of their mental map of reality. They also buried their parents in ground they walked over regularly, saw the same mountains or rivers or stretches of prairie every day of their lives, heard the same birds singing the same songs in the same trees year after year. Their sense of time was tied to place in a way that's almost impossible to recover now. They knew what this season felt like because they had felt it dozens of times before. In this location, under these conditions, they could read the land because they had read it over and over until its language became their language. This wasn't pastoral or romantic or easy. The same rootedness that gave them deep knowledge also trapped them, limited their opportunities. It bound them to hierarchies and systems they might have preferred to escape. The past was not better in most ways that matter. Material conditions were harsher. Medical care was primitive. Social mobility was rare. The kinds of freedoms you take for granted, to leave, to choose, to reinvent yourself, barely existed. But they had something you don't have. A relationship with place so deep it was almost cellular. They belonged to the ground in a way that shaped everything about how they understood themselves and the world. And that belonging, whatever its limitations, provided a kind of orientation that you lack. You can see it in the old stories. Every culture has them, tales tied to specific locations. This is the rock where the hero rested. This is the tree where the lovers met. This is the spring that appeared when the saint struck the ground. The stories aren't just about events. They're about the marriage of event and place, the way meaning gets anchored to landscape. When people lived in one place for generations, the landscape became a kind of text. You could walk through it and read your people's history in the features around you. That cairn marks a battle. That ancient oak was planted when the village was founded. That worn path was walked by your grandparents and their grandparents before them. The land held memory in a way that was physical and present, not abstract or archived. And the children growing up in such a place absorbed this without being taught. They learned the stories as they learned the landscape, each reinforcing the other. The old oak wasn't just a tree, and it was the place where something happened, where someone once stood, where the boundary was drawn. It had meaning beyond its biological existence because it was woven into the fabric of collective memory. Your oak tree, the one at the edge of your childhood neighborhood, has no such history. Or if it does, you don't know it. The land was probably farmland once, before it was subdivided and developed. Before that, forest. Before that, maybe a hunting ground for people whose names are lost. The tree has stood through all of it, a silent witness to transformations it had no stake in. But none of that history got passed down to you. You inherited a landscape without its stories, a place without its memory. This is the strange poverty of modern abundance. You have access to more information than any human in history. There are more images and stories and data about places all over the world. But you don't have the one kind of knowledge that mattered most for most of human history. Deep, embodied, generational knowledge of the place where you actually live. You could probably locate yourself on a digital map within seconds, see a satellite view of your location, overlay it with traffic data or weather patterns or demographic information. But could you identify the edible plants growing within a mile of your home? Could you predict tomorrow's weather from the behavior of local wildlife? Could you find water if the taps stopped running? These questions sound absurd because your survival doesn't depend on such knowledge anymore. You have other competencies, other forms of expertise that make you successful in the modern world. But you know how to navigate bureaucracies and interfaces and social systems. You know how to extract value from networks and information flows. You're literate in the languages that matter now: screens and spreadsheets and strategic communication. But some part of you still carries the genetic memory of being an animal that lived by knowing place. That part feels the absence even if you can't name it. That part recognizes the oak tree as important even though you can't explain why a tree should matter to someone with your education and opportunities and options. The ancestors who shaped your DNA lived for thousands of generations in intimate relationship with landscape. Only in the last few generations has that relationship been severed for most people. Only recently has it become normal to live in a place you have no deep knowledge of, to move regularly between locations that remain fundamentally foreign, to treat the physical world as a backdrop to the real action of your life, rather than as the matrix within which all meaning emerges. Evolution doesn't work that fast. You're still built for the old world even as you live in the new one. Your nervous system still expects certain inputs that it no longer receives. The felt sense of territory, the deep knowledge of place, the rhythm of days marked by solar movement rather than clock time, the experience of darkness that's actually dark, silence that's actually silent, air that carries information about weather and season and the presence of other living things. None of this is necessary for survival in the modern sense. You survive just fine without it. But perhaps survival isn't the right metric. Perhaps the question is, what kind of life is worth living? What conditions allow humans to feel at home in the world? What's lost when the relationship with place becomes purely instrumental? The oak tree at the bend in the road doesn't solve any of your problems. It doesn't pay your bills or advance your career or connect you with opportunities. It doesn't make you safer or healthier or more successful. By every practical measure, it's irrelevant to your life. And yet, you think about it, return to it in your mind. Feel something when you pass it that you don't feel about most things in your environment, because it represents what you've lost without meaning to lose it. The possibility of rootedness. The experience of having a relationship with a place that goes deeper than preference or convenience. Your ancestors would have had a tree. Not necessarily the same species, not necessarily in the same location, but a tree or a rock or a bend in a river that served the same function. A landmark, a gathering point, a marker of territory and memory. Something rooted and enduring that helped them orient themselves in space and time. And they would have known it the way you can't know anything anymore. Known it through years of interaction, through seasonal change, through the accumulated experience of return. They would have seen it in drought and flood, in leaf and in bareness, in morning light and evening shadow. They would have used it as a reference point so often that its location became part of their internal compass. The way you know, without thinking, which direction is toward your childhood home, even when you're far away. That knowledge wasn't sentimental. It was practical. Knowing the landmarks meant knowing the territory. Knowing the territory meant being able to navigate, to hunt, to find resources, to defend against threats. The tree was important because the land was important, and the land was important because survival depended on knowing it intimately. But it was more than survival too. Humans have always made meaning from place, have always told stories about why this mountain has that shape, why this river flows in that direction, why this tree stands alone on that hill. The meaning-making isn't separate from the survival. It's part of how humans orient themselves in reality. We need our places to matter, not just functionally, but symbolically. We need them to be more than locations, to be homes and territories and sacred grounds. The oak tree mattered to you as a child, not because you understood any of this, but because you lived it. The tree was the edge of your world, and that gave it significance. It marked a boundary that was real and felt, not just conceptual. Beyond it lay uncertainty. This side of it was known, familiar, yours. That simple spatial relationship created meaning without requiring explanation. And then you grew up. Your world expanded. The boundary that once seemed so important revealed itself as arbitrary, a line drawn by childhood limitation rather than actual geography. You could go past the oak tree whenever you wanted. Eventually, you did so without thinking, without even registering the crossing. The boundary dissolved because you no longer needed it. But maybe you did need it. Not the specific boundary, not the limitation itself, but the experience of having edges to your world, of living within a territory small enough to know deeply rather than a global network too vast to comprehend. Of having places that mattered not because you chose them from infinite options, but because they were yours by proximity and repetition, and the slow accumulation of experience. Modern life is sold as expansion. More options, more freedom, more connection, more access. And these are real goods. No one's suggesting you should have been kept within the bounds of your childhood neighborhood forever. That expansion is bad. That the old limitations were better than current freedoms. But every expansion comes with a cost. When you expanded your world beyond the oak tree, you gained access to everything that lay beyond it. But you lost the intimacy that comes from a world bounded enough to know completely. When you became mobile enough to live anywhere, you lost the rootedness that comes from committing to somewhere. When you connected to everyone digitally, you lost the depth of relationship that comes from being present with someone in the same physical place over years. These aren't necessary trade-offs. In theory, you could have both. You could be mobile and rooted, connected globally and present locally, free to go anywhere and deeply committed to somewhere. But in practice, the modern world is structured to maximize the former at the expense of the latter. Everything encourages movement, expansion, optimization, growth. Very little encourages staying, deepening, committing, being. And so you end up driving past an oak tree in the dusk and feeling something you can't quite name. A longing for a relationship with place you no longer have. A recognition that something important was lost in the gaining of so much else. Not a desire to go back. You can't go back. And even if you could, the past had its own deprivations and difficulties. But a question about whether forward is the only direction, whether more is the only measure of better, whether freedom from place is actually freedom at all, or just another kind of imprisonment. The tree doesn't answer these questions. It just stands there, doing what trees do, indifferent to your human struggles with meaning and belonging. But its presence poses the question anyway, poses it just by being what it is, rooted, enduring, committed to one place for its entire existence. What would it mean to live more like the tree? Not literally. You're not a plant, you need to move. Your survival strategy is different. But metaphorically, what would it mean to put down roots somewhere and commit to deepening that relationship rather than constantly seeking the next opportunity? What would it mean to know one place the way the tree knows its patch of soil, with complete intimacy, with total investment? You've been taught that such commitment is limiting, that to stay is to stagnate, to put down roots is to trap yourself, to love a place too much is to close yourself off from other possibilities. And there's truth in that. Commitment does mean foreclosing other options. Choosing one place means not choosing others. Depth in one location means less breadth across many. But the tree suggests a different calculation. That depth might be worth more than breadth. That knowing one place completely might yield more wisdom than knowing many places superficially. That there's a kind of freedom in commitment, a liberation that comes from accepting limitation and working within it rather than constantly seeking to transcend it. Your ancestors understood this in a way you don't. Not because they were wiser, but because they had no choice. They couldn't move easily. They couldn't pursue opportunities in distant places. They couldn't optimize their location based on climate and culture and career prospects. They stayed where they were, mostly, and they made meaning from that staying. They learned to love the places they were stuck with. They developed deep knowledge of landscapes they couldn't escape. And maybe that limitation created something valuable. Maybe being stuck somewhere forced a kind of relationship with place that choice makes difficult. When you can leave any time, you never quite arrive. You're always holding something back, always keeping your options open, always maintaining the psychic mobility that allows for future movement. You live in a state of permanent readiness to relocate, and that readiness prevents the kind of deep settling that real rootedness requires. The oak tree has no such option. It's committed absolutely to its location. Every bit of energy it produces goes into growing deeper roots, stronger trunk, wider canopy. It can't hedge its bets. It can't keep its options open. It's all in on this one spot, this one relationship with soil and sun and water. And paradoxically, that total commitment is what allows it to thrive. Because it's not dividing its energy between growing and preparing to move. It can focus entirely on growth. Because it's not holding back resources in case it needs to relocate, it can invest everything in going deeper, reaching higher, becoming more fully what it is. You're not a tree. Your thriving might require movement in a way the oaks doesn't. But the principle still holds. Total commitment to place creates possibilities that partial commitment forecloses. Deep rootedness allows for kinds of growth that constant mobility prevents. There's a strength in staying that has nothing to do with stagnation and everything to do with the power of complete investment. But how do you find that? How do you commit to a place in a world that treats all places as interchangeable, all locations as temporary, and all roots as something to be periodically pulled up and replanted elsewhere? How do you become rooted when everything about modern life is designed to keep you in motion? Maybe it starts with attention, with noticing where you are rather than always looking toward where you might be next, with learning the names of the trees in your neighborhood, the patterns of light at different times of day, the way the air smells before rain, with walking the same paths repeatedly until they become known in your body, not just in your mind, with staying long enough that you see the seasons turn, the years pass, the slow changes that only become visible to those who remain. Maybe it starts with ritual, with creating practices that tie you to place, that make your location matter in concrete ways, with planting a garden that takes years to mature, with joining communities that require sustained presence, with making commitments that can't be fulfilled quickly or remotely, with building relationships that depend on proximity, on regular face-to-face contact, on being there. Maybe it starts with grief, with acknowledging what's been lost rather than pretending the gains of modernity come without cost, with feeling the ache of rootlessness rather than medicating it with more movement, more options, more distraction, with sitting with the discomfort of not belonging until the discomfort itself becomes a kind of compass, pointing toward what you actually need. The oak tree has nothing to teach you directly. It's a tree, not a guru. It doesn't have wisdom to dispense or lessons to impart, but its existence poses a question that matters. A question about what it means to live well, to thrive, to be at home in the world. A question about whether the rootlessness that seems like freedom might actually be a kind of exile. And maybe the question is enough. Maybe you don't need answers right now. Maybe you just need to let yourself feel what you feel when you pass that tree in the gathering dark. The recognition, the longing, the sense that something important has been lost and might, with attention and commitment and time, be found again. Not the same way. Not as a return to childhood or to an imagined past where everything was simpler, but as a choice made now, in the present, with full knowledge of the costs and benefits. A choice to belong somewhere, to put down roots, even in temporary soil, to commit to knowing a place deeply, even if you might leave it someday, to let yourself be shaped by landscape and weather and the particular conditions of this specific location. The tree stands in darkness now. The traffic has thinned. The lights from passing cars illuminate it briefly and then move on, leaving it in shadow. But it remains. It will be there tomorrow and the day after and the day after that. It will be there when you've forgotten about it again, when you've returned to the usual preoccupations and distractions of your life. It will be there whether you notice it or not. And maybe that's the final gift of the rooted thing, that it doesn't require your attention to have value, that it simply is, whether you're paying attention or not, that it offers the possibility of relationship without demanding it, that it stands as a reminder whenever you're ready to remember. And that rootedness is possible. That depth exists. That belonging is still available to those willing to commit to place long enough to let the relationship deepen into something real. You drive on into the night. But something has shifted. Some small seed of recognition has been planted. Not an answer, not a solution. Just a question that will keep working in you, quietly, the way seeds work in soil. The question of what it would mean to stay, to root, to belong again. Consider what the tree actually does, day after day, year after year. It performs the same basic functions, drawing water and nutrients from the soil, converting sunlight to energy, growing incrementally, shedding leaves and regrowing them, hosting the insects and birds and fungi that depend on it. There's no variety in the work, no advancement, no optimization. And just the same processes repeated endlessly, the same slow accumulation of mass and complexity. By modern standards, this would be considered a wasted life. No progress, no innovation, no disruption or growth in the sense that growth is usually understood in your world. Just being, just existing, just doing the same thing over and over in the same place. But the tree is magnificent because of this repetition, not in spite of it. Each year of growth adds another ring to the trunk, another increment of strength and stability. The roots go deeper with each season, finding new sources of water, stabilizing the soil, extending the network that keeps the tree upright through storms. The canopy spreads wider, creating more shade, more habitat, more presence in the landscape. The tree becomes more itself through time, more solidly what it is, more completely adapted to its specific location, more integrated into the web of relationships, with soil, with weather, with other organisms that make up its world. This is a kind of success your culture barely recognizes. Not the success of achievement or acquisition or advancement, but the success of becoming, of growing into yourself more fully, of deepening the relationships that matter, of being so completely where you are that you become inseparable from that place, essential to it, woven into its fabric. Your ancestors knew this kind of success. They saw it in the old people who had lived in one place for so long that they seemed to embody it. The grandmother who knew the healing properties of every plant in the area. The grandfather who could predict weather from subtle signs no one else noticed. The elder who held the stories of the place, who could tell you what had happened here and why it mattered. These people weren't successful by the metrics you use now. They hadn't accumulated wealth or prestige or power in any conventional sense. They hadn't traveled widely or collected experiences or optimized their lives. They had simply stayed, had committed to one place long enough that the knowledge and relationship accumulated depth that can't be achieved any other way. And the community recognized this as valuable, honored it, sought it out. Because everyone understood that deep knowledge of place was essential for collective survival. That someone needed to know where the good fishing spots were, where to find certain plants in certain seasons, where the dangers lay, where the sacred places should be honored. This knowledge couldn't be found in books or passed down abstractly. It had to be lived, embodied, earned through years of attention and presence. The oak tree has that kind of knowledge, not consciously, but in its very structure. Its roots have mapped the underground terrain in search of water and nutrients. Its trunk has recorded decades of weather patterns in the spacing and thickness of its rings. Its branches have adapted to the prevailing winds, the angle of sunlight, the shape of the space available for growth. Every part of it is a record of its relationship with this specific place. And because it has stayed, because it has committed completely to this location, it has become valuable to everything around it. The birds that nest in its branches depend on it. The insects that live in its bark depend on it. The fungi that connect to its roots in mycorrhizal networks depend on it. The soil that its fallen leaves enrich depends on it. Even the humans who pass it by, who mostly don't notice it, depend on it in ways they don't recognize. For the oxygen it produces, for the water it helps filter, for the cooling shade it provides, for the simple fact of its presence as a living thing in a landscape increasingly dominated by dead materials. This is what rootedness creates. Not just individual flourishing, but collective benefit. The rooted thing becomes a nexus, a meeting point, a source of support for everything around it. It doesn't do this intentionally or virtuously. It simply does it by being what it is, where it is, for long enough that its existence becomes woven into the fabric of the place. You live differently. You move through the world extracting value from jobs, from relationships, from locations. You come, you take what you need, you leave. This isn't malicious, it's rational. It's how you've been taught to survive in a mobile, individualistic society. You can't afford to put down roots because you might need to leave at any moment. You can't commit completely to a place because a better opportunity might arise elsewhere. You have to keep your options open, stay flexible, remain ready to relocate. But the cost of this strategy is that you never become essential to anywhere. You never stay long enough to be woven into the fabric of a place, to become someone the community depends on, to accumulate the kind of knowledge that only comes from sustained presence. You remain, in some fundamental sense, a visitor everywhere you go. You're passing through, taking what you need, leaving little behind. And maybe this is why the oak tree unsettles you, because it represents the opposite of how you've learned to live. It represents commitment so total that reversal is impossible, investment so complete that holding back is unthinkable, presence so sustained that leaving is literally death. The tree can't leave. If it somehow could, if you could uproot it and transplant it elsewhere, the shock would likely kill it. Its survival depends on the specific relationships it has developed with this specific soil, this specific weather pattern, this specific ecosystem. It's not interchangeable. This oak, in this place, is irreplaceable in a way that nothing in your life is irreplaceable. You could be replaced at your job within weeks. You could be replaced in your apartment within days. Even your relationships, dear as they are, could probably adapt to your absence if you moved away. You stay connected digitally, visit occasionally, and life goes on. You're not essential to anywhere or anyone in the way the oak is essential to the birds that nest in it, the insects that feed on it, the soil that depends on its fallen leaves. This isn't a moral judgment. You're not a worse person for being mobile rather than rooted. But it is a different kind of existence, one with different possibilities and different limitations. And maybe part of what aches when you see the oak is the recognition that you've traded the possibility of being essential to a place for the freedom to go anywhere. You've gained mobility but lost mattering in the deepest sense. Your ancestors mattered to their places. Or they knew this because the land fed them or didn't feed them based on how well they understood and tended it. They knew this because their communities depended on the knowledge they accumulated about local conditions. They knew this because they were buried in ground that held the bones of their parents and grandparents, making even their death a gift to the place that had sustained them in life. The relationship was reciprocal in a way that's hard to grasp now. The place shaped them, their diet, their rhythms, their understanding of the world, and they shaped the place, clearing fields, diverting water, managing forests, domesticating landscapes. Over generations, people and places co-evolved, each adapting to the other, until it became impossible to say where the natural ended and the human began. The oak tree you pass now stands in a landscape that's been shaped by humans for generations. The subdivision where you grew up was farmland once. Before that, managed forest. Before that, hunting grounds. Each generation of humans left their mark, and each generation of trees adapted to human presence. The oak might have been spared when the land was cleared for farming because someone saw value in it. Shade for livestock, a landmark, a source of nuts. Or it might have sprouted after farming began, in a hedgerow or fence line where it could grow without interfering with cultivation. Either way, its existence is intertwined with human use of the landscape, even though no one now remembers the specific decisions that allowed it to survive and grow where it is. The tree has outlasted the memory of why it's there. I outlasted the people who might have planted or spared it, outlasted the farms and fields that once surrounded it. It has persisted through the transformation of the landscape from rural to suburban, from agricultural to residential, from a place where people grew their own food to a place where people commute to jobs in distant locations. And in persisting, it has become a kind of witness. Not conscious witness, but witness nonetheless. A living connection to a landscape that no longer exists except in the form of this tree and perhaps a few others like it, scattered through the suburbs, remnants of an earlier relationship between people and place. You drive past it in your car, sealed off from the weather, climate controlled, listening to music or podcasts or the voice of your GPS telling you where to turn. You're in the landscape, but not of it. You move through it without being touched by it, without touching it in return. Your relationship with place is mediated by technology, by infrastructure, by systems designed to protect you from direct contact with earth and weather and the particularities of location. This protection is real and valuable. You don't have to worry about mud or rain or heat or cold the way your ancestors did. You don't have to know the landscape intimately because you have tools that compensate for that knowledge. You can navigate anywhere with GPS. You can find food without knowing what grows locally. You can survive and even thrive without the deep place-based knowledge that was once essential. But the protection comes at a cost. You're insulated from the very things that might teach you what it means to belong to a place. You don't feel the weather change. You don't notice the seasonal shifts. You don't see the stars. You don't hear the birds. You don't smell the earth after rain. All the subtle inputs that once tied humans to their environments are filtered out by the technologies designed to make your life easier. And so you can live in a place for years without really knowing it, without learning its rhythms and patterns, without developing the embodied familiarity that comes from direct, repeated, unmediated contact. You can live in a place and remain essentially homeless, not in the material sense, but in the deeper sense of never quite being at home, never quite belonging, never quite feeling that this place and you are related in any meaningful way. The oak tree knows its place in a way you don't know yours. Knows it because it has no choice, because its life depends on that knowing, because every cell of its being is adapted to this specific location. You have choices, options, the freedom to not know because you don't need to know. But freedom from necessity is different from freedom to thrive. And maybe what you're missing, what the tree represents, is the kind of deep knowing that comes not from choice, but from commitment. What would it take to know a place the way the tree knows it? You can't put down literal roots. You can't draw nutrients from the soil or convert sunlight to energy. But you could commit to staying. You could choose to learn what grows here, what lives here, what happens here across the seasons. You could walk the same paths regularly until you notice the changes, the subtle shifts that mark time in a rooted life. You could learn the names of things, not just trees and birds, though that too, but the specific individuals. This oak, not just an oak. That cardinal, not just a cardinal. The knowing that comes from recognition, from seeing the same beings repeatedly until they become familiar, until they stop being generic examples of their type and become themselves, particular and irreplaceable. This is what children do naturally. They learn their territory the way they learn language, through immersion and repetition. They don't study it abstractly, they live it. They climb the trees, explore the paths, test the boundaries. They develop relationship with place through the body, through direct contact, through the accumulation of experience that eventually becomes knowledge. And somewhere in the process of growing up and becoming mobile and sophisticated, you lost this. You learned to relate to places abstractly, strategically, instrumentally. You learned to evaluate them based on criteria: cost of living, job opportunities, cultural amenities, climate, rather than through direct felt experience. You learned to think about place rather than to be in place. The oak tree is in its place completely. Every moment of its existence is spent being exactly where it is, responding to exactly the conditions that exist right now. It doesn't think about whether it would be better off somewhere else. It doesn't compare its location to other locations. It doesn't optimize or strategize or plan. It simply is here, now, always. This sounds limiting from the outside. Sounds like imprisonment, like deprivation of freedom and choice. But perhaps it's actually a kind of liberation. Freedom from the tyranny of infinite choice. Freedom from the anxiety of optimization. Freedom from the restlessness that comes from always wondering if somewhere else might be better. Your ancestors had less choice about where they lived, and that forced a kind of acceptance that you've lost. They couldn't spend their lives wondering if they'd made the right choice about location, because they mostly hadn't made a choice at all. They were where they were by birth and circumstance, and the only question was how to make meaning from that. How to love the place they were stuck with. How to find beauty and purpose and home in whatever landscape surrounded them. And maybe there was a kind of peace in that. Not the peace of contentment. Their lives were often hard, often constrained by limitations that would be unacceptable now. But the peace of resolution, of having the question settled, of being able to invest completely in the place they were, because there was no point in reserving energy for the possibility of somewhere else. You have infinite choice, and it makes you anxious. You could live anywhere, could move whenever you want, could optimize your location based on any number of factors. And so you never quite settle, never quite commit, never quite allow yourself to root deeply because you might need to pull up those roots and move them elsewhere. The oak tree offers a different model, not a return to limited choice. You can't and probably shouldn't go back to being trapped by circumstance, but a different understanding of what choice might mean. The choice to stay, the choice to commit, the choice to let yourself root in one place even though you could theoretically live elsewhere. This is harder than it sounds. Every day you're reminded of other options. Every feed you scroll through shows you beautiful places you could visit or live. Every success story you hear involves someone who had the courage to leave, to seek opportunity elsewhere, to not settle for where they started. The cultural message is clear. Staying is failing. Movement is growth. Roots are for trees, not for ambitious humans. But the oak persists in your mind anyway. Stands as a counter-argument to all the cultural messages about mobility and optimization. Suggests that maybe there's a different kind of success, a different kind of growth, one that comes from depth rather than breadth, from knowing one place completely rather than knowing many places partially, from being essential to somewhere rather than being replaceable everywhere. What if you chose a place and committed to it the way the oak is committed? Not because you had to, not because you lacked options, but because you recognized that depth of relationship requires time and presence and sustained attention. That you can't know a place by visiting it occasionally or living there temporarily while keeping one eye on the exit. That real belonging requires a kind of surrender, a giving up of the constant evaluation of whether you've made the right choice. The tree doesn't evaluate, it grows. It responds to conditions. It adapts and changes and develops over time. But it does all of this from a position of absolute commitment to place. And that commitment is what allows for the depth of relationship, the integration into the ecosystem, the becoming essential rather than optional. You're still driving past it, still moving while it stays. But something has changed in you. Some recognition that the movement, which you've always understood as freedom, might also be a kind of flight. That staying might require more courage than leaving. That roots might not be chains, but anchors, not limitations, but the foundation for a different kind of growth. The night deepens around you. The tree disappears into darkness behind you. But its image persists, and with it a question that won't quite resolve. What would it mean to stay? To choose rootedness? To commit to a place long enough to really know it? To be shaped by it? To become part of what it is? The question doesn't demand an immediate answer. Questions like this work slowly, the way roots work through soil, gradually, persistently, finding their way into cracks and spaces you didn't know existed. The question has been planted. Now it needs time to grow. But think for a moment about what the tree endures. It doesn't just stand in pleasant weather and gentle seasons. It stands through storms that tear at its branches, through droughts that test its roots, through freezes that could kill it if it hadn't adapted to expect them. It stands through the stress of pollution, through the compaction of soil from foot traffic and construction, through the thousand small insults of existing in a human-dominated landscape. Every scar on its trunk is a record of trauma survived. Every twisted branch tells a story of growth interrupted and then resumed. The tree bears the marks of its history in its very body, visible to anyone who knows how to read them. Fire scars, frost cracks, places where branches broke and the wound was sealed over. Lightning strikes that split the trunk and somehow didn't kill it. Disease that took part of the canopy but didn't take the whole. This is what it means to stay, to endure what comes, to adapt to conditions that can't be avoided, to survive not by escaping, but by developing resilience, by growing strong enough to withstand the inevitable storms. Your ancestors understood this too. They couldn't leave when conditions got hard, couldn't relocate to avoid drought or flood or pestilence. They had to stay and endure, had to adapt or die. And the ones who survived passed down not just their genes, but their knowledge. How to store food for winter, how to find water in dry seasons, how to read weather signs and prepare for what was coming. This knowledge was survival knowledge, earned through hardship, tested by necessity. It wasn't romantic or beautiful. It was practical and hard-won, and often purchased with suffering. The old oak that marked the boundary wasn't just a pleasant landmark. It might have been a shelter during a storm, a navigation point when someone was lost, a place to gather when the community needed to make decisions. Its value was embedded in its presence, its reliability, its simple fact of being there when needed. You don't need the tree in that way anymore. You have other shelters, other navigation tools, other gathering places. The tree's practical value has been replaced by technology and infrastructure. What remains is something harder to quantify: the symbolic value, the psychological value, the value of continuity and witness, and the simple presence of something that stays. But even this diminished role matters more than you might think. Because humans need markers, need orientation points, need things that remain steady while everything else changes. Not for practical navigation, you have GPS for that, but for emotional and psychological navigation, for the sense that some things endure, that not everything is temporary, that there are still fixed points in a fluid world. The oak tree provides that, not intentionally, not consciously, but by simply being what it is where it is, by standing year after year in the same spot, by marking the same boundary, by holding the same position, maintaining the same relationship with the land, by being recognizable, familiar, present. Think about how rare that is now, how few things in your life are truly constant. Your phone updates constantly, changing interface and function. Your apps are redesigned regularly, forcing you to relearn what you already knew. Your favorite stores close or are replaced. Buildings are torn down and rebuilt. Even streets are rerouted, neighborhoods rezoned, landmarks demolished in the name of progress or efficiency. The pace of change is accelerating. Things that lasted for generations now last for years. Things that lasted for years now last for months. The cycle of novelty and obsolescence spins faster and faster, creating a landscape that's constantly shifting, constantly becoming something new, never quite settling into anything you can know deeply. And in the midst of all this flux, an oak tree stands, unchanged in any way that matters. Still oak, still tree, still there. Still performing the same basic functions it has always performed. Still growing at the same slow pace that can't be accelerated by innovation or disruption. The tree is anachronistic, out of step with the modern rhythm. Too slow for an age that values speed, too patient for a culture of instant gratification, too committed to place for a society that celebrates mobility. It shouldn't work. It shouldn't matter. It should be irrelevant to your hypermodern life. But it isn't. It matters precisely because it's out of step, because it represents a different way of being in time, a different relationship with change. Because it suggests that maybe constant acceleration isn't the only option, that maybe there's value in the slow, the patient, the enduring. Your life is optimized for efficiency. You can do more in a day than your ancestors could do in a week. You can communicate instantly across any distance. You can access information about anything within seconds. You can be anywhere virtually, know anything theoretically, connect with anyone digitally. And yet you're not happier than they were. Might even be less happy by some measures. More anxious, more depressed, more disconnected despite being more connected than ever. Something about the optimization has optimized away something essential. Something about the acceleration has left something crucial behind. The tree grows at the same rate it has always grown, and adds the same annual ring of new wood, no faster despite all your technological advances. Responds to the same seasonal cues, unfurls its leaves when the temperature and day length signal that it's time, drops them when those same signals indicate the approach of winter. Lives in relationship with rhythms that are deeper and older than human civilization. Rhythms that continue regardless of what humans are doing. And maybe you need exposure to those rhythms. Maybe you need to be reminded that not everything can be accelerated, that some processes require time and can't be rushed, that growth isn't always about going faster or doing more, but sometimes about deepening, strengthening, becoming more fully what you are. The tree doesn't multitask, doesn't optimize, doesn't hustle or grind or disrupt. It simply grows, simply lives. It simply does what trees do, at the pace trees do it, with the patience that millions of years of evolution have determined is the right pace for trees. You've lost this patience, have been trained out of it by a culture that treats waiting as waste, that equates speed with progress, that can't imagine that slow might sometimes be better than fast. You're always rushing, always behind, always trying to do more in less time. The idea of spending years, let alone decades, doing one thing in one place at a sustainable pace seems impossible, wasteful, a failure of ambition. But the tree suggests otherwise, suggests that there's a kind of success that only comes from sustained, patient, committed presence. That the deep root system that allows the tree to survive droughts and storms takes years to develop. That the massive trunk that can withstand high winds is built slowly, ring by ring, year by year. That there are no shortcuts to the kind of strength that comes from time and rootedness. Your ancestors knew this in ways you've forgotten. They planted trees they would never see mature. They built structures meant to last for generations. They made decisions with the seventh generation in mind, thinking not just about immediate benefit, but about long-term consequences for descendants they would never meet. This kind of thinking is alien to modern life. You're encouraged to think in quarters, in election cycles, in short-term gains. Long-term thinking means maybe 5 years out, 10 at most. The idea of making decisions that won't pay off for decades, that will only benefit people you'll never know, seems irrational, inefficient, not optimal. But maybe that's exactly the kind of thinking you need. Maybe the rootlessness you feel comes partly from living only in the short term, only for immediate benefit, only with an eye to the next opportunity rather than to the long arc of becoming. Maybe you need to plant trees you won't see mature, need to make commitments that won't pay off quickly, need to invest in depth over time rather than breadth in space. The oak tree is the result of someone or something making a decision that took decades to bear fruit. Whether deliberately planted or accidentally sprouted, it was allowed to grow. Someone saw the sapling and didn't cut it down. Saw the young tree and didn't clear it for farmland. saw the mature tree and spared it when the subdivision was built. Generation after generation of decisions to let it remain, to let it keep growing, to preserve it even when it might have been more profitable or convenient to remove it. And now it stands as a monument to those decisions, as proof that some things are worth preserving, not for their immediate utility, but for their long-term value, for what they represent, for what they witness, for the simple fact of their endurance. You're the beneficiary of decisions made before you were born. The tree was there when you first saw it as a child, was already old, already substantial, already a landmark. You inherited it the way you inherited the roads and houses and infrastructure that shaped your childhood. You didn't create it, didn't earn it, didn't choose it. It was simply given to you, a gift from the past, and from people who made choices that allowed it to survive until you could pass it on your way to wherever you were going. And what are you passing on? What are you preserving or creating or nurturing that will outlast you? What roots are you putting down that will stabilize the soil for future generations? These questions feel heavy because the answers aren't obvious. You're mobile, temporary, focused on your own life and immediate concerns. The idea of making decisions for the benefit of people you'll never meet, of investing in things that won't pay off in your lifetime, feels abstract and distant. But the tree stands as a reminder that your life is embedded in time in ways you don't usually acknowledge, that you are the recipient of gifts from the past and the potential giver of gifts to the future, that your choices, even small ones, are ripple outward in ways you can't predict or control, that staying in one place and tending it and committing to it might be one of the most generous things you could do. Not for yourself necessarily. You might never see the full fruit of that commitment. But for the place itself, for the community, for the future inhabitants who might benefit from what you nurture now, for the possibility that there might still be oak trees, or their equivalent, standing as landmarks and witnesses when your great-grandchildren pass by, wondering at the rootedness of things that stay. The darkness has settled completely now. You're far past the tree, miles into your journey, but its image remains. Not as a clear picture, but as a feeling, a presence, a question that won't quite let go. And maybe that's enough for now. Maybe the work of the tree, the gift it offers, is simply to pose the question of rootedness in a way that can't be easily dismissed or rationalized away. To make you wonder, even briefly, what it would mean to stay, to commit, to put down roots so deep that pulling them up becomes unthinkable, to become essential to a place rather than merely passing through it, to grow slowly and patiently toward a kind of maturity that can only come with time. The tree will still be there tomorrow, will be there next week, next year, likely for years after you're gone. It doesn't need your attention or your questions. It doesn't require your understanding to have value. It simply is, in a way that's becoming increasingly rare, increasingly precious, increasingly necessary. And you are still becoming, still mobile, still searching, still trying to figure out what it means to live well in a world that makes rootedness difficult. The tree can't answer that for you, can't tell you where to stay, or how to commit, or what roots to put down. But it can stand as witness to the possibility, as evidence that some things endure, as reminder that you too are a creature that might benefit from depth over breadth, from commitment over optionality, from the slow, patient work of growing into a place rather than constantly moving through places. Let yourself feel the weight of that, the gravity of rootedness, the pull towards staying that you've been resisting or ignoring or explaining away. Let yourself wonder what it would mean to honor that pull, to stop running toward the next thing long enough to really arrive where you are. Not forever necessarily, not as a prison or a trap, but as a choice, a commitment, a decision to value depth of relationship over breadth of experience, to know one place completely rather than know many places superficially, to become part of what is rather than always seeking what might be. The oak tree grows in darkness and light, in rain and drought, in the forgotten hours when no one is watching. It grows whether you notice or not, whether you care or not, whether you ever pass by again or not. It grows because that's what it is, what it does, what millions of years of evolution have shaped it to do. And you? What are you shaped to do? What are you becoming as you move through the world, never quite settling, never quite arriving? What roots are trying to grow that you keep pulling up in the name of opportunity or optimization or freedom? These aren't questions with easy answers, but they're questions worth sitting with, worth feeling, worth letting work in you the way roots work through soil, slowly, persistently, finding their way into spaces you didn't know existed, creating stability you didn't know you needed. The tree has done its work just by being there, by standing long enough for you to notice it, to remember it, to feel something when you pass. That's all it can do, all it needs to do. The rest is up to you, whether you stay or go, whether you root or keep moving, whether you commit to depth or continue seeking breadth. The tree doesn't judge, doesn't care, simply stands as possibility, as reminder, as witness to a different way of being in the world. And maybe that's the final gift. Not answers, but presence. Not solutions, but witness. Not a map, but a marker. It's like the tree says, this is what staying looks like. This is what commitment makes possible. This is what roots can do, given time and patience and the courage to remain. What you do with that information is your choice, your freedom, your burden, and your opportunity. The tree has shown you what it knows. The rest of the journey is yours. You continue driving through the darkness. The road unfolds ahead of you, illuminated only by your headlights, everything else receding into shadow. But the image of the tree remains, standing in its place, rooted and alive and patient, waiting for nothing, expecting nothing, simply being what it has always been, where it has always been, as it has always been. A witness, a marker, a question posed in wooden bark and the slow accumulation of years. And you carry that question with you now, whether you wanted to or not, whether you asked for it or not. It's yours now, part of your landscape, internal and enduring. What will you do with it? Where will you let it lead you? What roots will you allow to grow? The darkness holds these questions without demanding answers. The road continues without caring where you're going. And somewhere behind you, already fading into distance and memory, an oak tree stands in the night, doing what oak trees do, being what oak trees are, knowing what oak trees know about patience and presence, and the deep, slow work of staying. Settle into the darkness now. Let the motion of travel become a kind of meditation. You're moving, but you can imagine stillness. You're passing through, but you can imagine staying. The boundary between motion and rest, between leaving and arriving, begins to blur as the night deepens and the familiar landmarks fall away. You won't arrive anywhere tonight that feels like home in the deepest sense. That's not a criticism, just an observation. Home in that sense, the kind of home the tree has, the kind your ancestors knew, takes time to build, takes years of return, of presence, of the slow accumulation of relationship between self and place. You can't buy it or achieve it, or optimize your way into it. You can only grow it, the way roots grow, slowly and mostly out of sight. But you can begin. You can notice where you are, can pay attention to the trees in your neighborhood, the shape of the land, the quality of light at different times of day, can walk the same path repeatedly until it becomes known in your body, can learn the names of things, is both the general names and the specific identities. This oak, that cardinal, these particular stones in this particular stream. Small gestures toward rootedness, tiny commitments that acknowledge your need for place even as you maintain the mobility that modern life requires. You don't have to choose between staying and going, between roots and wings. But you do have to acknowledge what's lost when you live only in motion. Do have to tend the part of yourself that longs for belonging, for territory, for the deep knowledge that comes from sustained presence. The oak tree asks nothing of you, makes no demands, doesn't require you to change your life or abandon your plans or give up your freedom. It simply stands as possibility, as reminder, as evidence that rootedness exists and has value even in a world that mostly ignores or dismisses it. Yeah, and maybe that's enough. Maybe you don't need to become the tree, don't need to root yourself so completely that movement becomes impossible. Maybe you just need to remember that the tree exists, that rootedness is possible, that some things stay while others move, and both have their place, both have their value, both are needed. The night grows later, your eyes grow heavy. The road continues, but your attention begins to drift, begins to soften, begins to settle into something quieter than thought. The image of the tree remains, but it's changing, becoming less visual and more felt. A presence rather than a picture, a quality rather than an object. Rootedness, presence, the patience of growing in one place, the strength that comes from depth, the knowledge that comes from sustained attention. Well, all of this lives in the tree, and all of it lives in you too, potentially, waiting to be developed, waiting for the time and space and commitment that would allow it to grow. But not tonight. Tonight is for rest, for letting go of the questions you've been carrying, for allowing the motion of travel to rock you into stillness, the way a parent rocks a child, the way wind rocks the branches of a tree, gentle and steady and without urgency. The oak stands in its place. You move through yours. And somewhere between standing and moving, between rootedness and mobility, between the deep commitment of the tree and the restless freedom of modern life, there's a balance, a way of being that honors both needs, that acknowledges the value of roots even as it maintains the ability to move. You don't have to find that balance tonight. Don't have to solve the problem of belonging in a mobile world. Don't have to choose between staying and going. You just have to rest, have to let the questions settle, have to allow yourself to imagine, even briefly, what it would feel like to belong somewhere the way the tree belongs to its patch of earth. Completely, totally, without reservation or doubt, rooted so deeply that the relationship between self and place becomes inseparable, becomes constitutive, becomes the very ground of being. You can't live that way, probably. Can't root that deeply in a world that requires mobility. But you can touch it in imagination, can feel what it might be like, can let that feeling inform your choices, your commitments, your relationship with wherever you are right now. The tree is a teacher without teaching, a guide without guiding, a presence that asks only to be noticed, and in being noticed offers the gift of its example. Stay, it says without saying. Commit, it suggests without suggesting. Root deeply into the place where you find yourself, even if you might someday leave. Know this place while you're here. Let it shape you. Let yourself shape it in return. These aren't commands, just possibilities, offerings from a tree that knows nothing of human struggle, but nonetheless embodies something humans need. The reminder that endurance is possible, that commitment bears fruit, that some things are worth tending across years and decades, even if the benefits aren't immediately apparent. Your breathing slows. Your grip on the wheel loosens. The boundary between waking and sleeping begins to blur, and with it, the boundary between motion and stillness, between questions and answers, between the anxiety of rootlessness and the peace of belonging. The oak tree stands in the darkness, and you stand with it in imagination, feeling the stability of roots going deep, feeling the patient strength of trunk and branch, feeling the slow circulation of water and nutrients, the quiet respiration of photosynthesis. the cellular division that adds new rings of growth year by year by year. You are not a tree, but you are an animal that evolved to have territory, to know place deeply, to belong to landscape in ways that shaped everything about how you understood yourself and the world. That evolutionary inheritance is still in you, still shaping your needs and longings, even in a world that makes satisfying those needs difficult. The tree reminds you of this, calls you back to something older than modernity, deeper than technology, more fundamental than all the recent innovations that have changed how humans live, but haven't changed what humans are. You are a creature that needs place, needs belonging, needs the felt sense of being at home somewhere, of having roots that go deep enough to weather storms, of being part of something larger and older and more enduring than your individual life. The tree offers this not as argument, but as presence. It simply is, and in being what it is, reminds you of what you are, what you could be, what you might need in order to feel whole. Let that reminder settle into you now. Let it work below the level of conscious thought. Let it root itself in the soil of your being, not as a problem to be solved, but as a truth to be lived with, returned to, and tended over time. You don't have to decide anything tonight. Don't have to make commitments or plans or resolutions. You just have to rest. Have to let yourself be held by the darkness and the motion and the image of a tree standing alone in the night, rooted and patient and alive. The road carries you forward. The tree remains behind, and you exist in the space between, moving but imagining stillness, unrooted but dreaming of depth, free but longing for the kind of belonging that only commitment makes possible. This is where you are. This is what you carry. The oak tree and all it represents. The question of rootedness in a mobile world. The ache of belonging in an age of disconnection. The possibility that staying might be its own kind of courage, that depth might be its own kind of success, that knowing one place completely might matter more than experiencing many places briefly. The questions fade as sleep approaches. The images blur and soften. The boundary between you and the world around you becomes porous, permeable, until you're not sure where you end and the darkness begins. And in that uncertainty, that dissolution, there's peace. The peace of letting go, of not knowing, of allowing yourself to rest in the questions rather than grasping for answers. The tree stands. You rest. And between the standing and the resting, between rootedness and release, between the oak in its place and you in your motion, there's a recognition, a sense of connection that doesn't require understanding, a knowing that goes deeper than words. You are not the tree, but you are related to it. Share with it the fact of being alive, and of being here, of being part of a world that includes both movement and stillness, both freedom and commitment, both the restless seeking of modern life and the patient rootedness of things that stay. Let yourself feel that relationship now. Let it hold you as you drift towards sleep. Let the image of the oak standing in darkness become your anchor, your ground, your reminder that some things endure even when everything else changes. The trunk solid and strong, the roots deep and stable, the branches reaching but not grasping, the leaves that come and go with the seasons but the tree that remains, constant, present, witness to the passage of time and the turning of years. You are carried by motion, but you can imagine stillness. You are temporary, but you can imagine endurance. You are unrooted, but you can imagine belonging. And in that imagination, in that possibility, in that space between what is and what might be, there's rest, there's peace, there's the beginning of something that could, given time and attention and commitment, become real. The oak tree has given you what it has to give. Not answers, but presence. Not solutions, but witness. Not certainty, but possibility. Take that gift now into sleep, into rest, into the darkness that holds all questions without demanding answers. that allows all longing without requiring resolution, that accepts you as you are while reminding you of what you might become. Rooted, present, committed to place and time, and the slow, patient work of growing into yourself more fully. Not by leaving, but by staying. Not by seeking, but by settling. Not by moving towards some distant goal, but by deepening where you are. The road fades. The motion stills. The questions dissolve into the larger darkness. And you rest, finally, held by nothing but the night and the memory of a tree, and the possibility that belonging might be closer than you think, might require nothing more than the choice to stay, to notice, to let yourself be shaped by where you are while shaping it in return. The oak stands in its place. You rest in yours. And the darkness holds both, tree and human, stillness and motion, roots and wings, belonging and freedom, all of it together, all of it part of the same world, the same night, the same quiet breathing of being alive and present and here. Rest now. Let the roots grow in darkness. Let the questions settle into soil. Let yourself be held by the simple fact of being here, being now, being part of something larger than yourself. Something that includes oak trees and dark roads and the ancient human longing for a place to call home. Rest. The tree stands. You rest. And that is enough.